So today I want to talk about the warrior archetype and how it connects for me to personal development, and basically how it connects to, you know, real life, right? Because so first of all, when I'm talking about the warrior, I'm talking about essentially the archetype, coming from the idea of like the four masculine archetypes being warrior, king, magician, lover. And I'm actually not sure where this was first proposed. I'm not entirely sure where this idea comes from, but it's definitely something that resonates, right? That's like these like the four aspects, and we also see them again and again in stories, right? Those are generally like the male characters in stories often fit these archetypes pretty neatly. And for me, in my personal experience, the warrior archetype was like the important one. So that was the thing that influenced me when I was a kid. I was very influenced by, I loved everything with, you know, superheroes and stories about like knights and whatnot, right? That kind of thing was, it was my favorite kind of story. And I also started training martial arts because of that influence, right? Because I kind of wanted to be this, right? And then also the writings of Miyamoto Musashi, who's like a swordsman from feudal Japan, and who wrote the Book of Five Rings. That was pretty influential for me. And also was very influential for me was actually Bruce Lee and his book on Jeet Kune Do, which is like his philosophy on martial arts. And I think Bruce Lee is an interesting character there because he was also a bit of a philosopher, right? And he also brought that across in his movies to some extent. But I just realized that in my life that has been a really important influence. Like these warriors and this kind of the warrior archetype and warrior culture was really formative for me. And also, you know, to put this into context, right, I basically spent my entire youth training martial arts. So from the age of, I trained judo when I was a kid, and then from the age of like 13 to 23 or something, I was basically training pretty much every day. And then the next 5 years, I was training. I was no longer in an organization, but I was still training with my friends. So it's like really a big chunk of my life revolved around martial arts. And what I've noticed is that basically that I keep noticing how this influence has been useful for me in everything else that I do, including everything related to self-development. And I want to unpack that a little bit because I've also especially noticed it now that I've had this injury, which meant I couldn't train, I couldn't exercise for like 2 months. And even though now I can more or less move my arm normally again, but I still, you know, I'm pretty far away. Like it's going to be one of the last things in the recovery where I'm so far recovered that I can do martial arts stuff again, right? Because it's one thing to lift weights where you can, you know, do it like nice and slow, but if you're throwing punches and grappling and stuff, you really have to
right.
You really have to be at full function. And I think that also made me notice like how much I need that in my life, you know. I feel really deprived because I can't train. So, but yeah, let's talk a bit about, basically I compiled notes here on, you know, how does this translate into real life? Yeah. Because if you think about the archetype of the warrior, what is that, right? It's basically, it is someone who applies discipline and training in order to make himself more formidable,
right,
and make himself stronger, and then uses that strength in order to protect others.
Yeah, and that's the important part with the warrior, right? So what you want to explore today is how this is like transferable across different areas of life, right?
Yeah.
In particular, self-development. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because of course that sounds cool, right? It's okay. You train, and especially for me, you know, when I think warrior, I think like, you know, I think like 300, right? The Spartans from 300 or something, right? You're training with your shields and spears, and you're super ripped and stuff, right? That's the image that comes to mind, right? And obviously, yeah, you're supposed to be heroic and courageous, so you use your strength in service of others. But again, well, okay, we're not out here, practicing how to use a shield and spear, and we're not defending our hometown against invading barbarians, right?
Against the other people from the other town.
Yeah, which the savage barbarians, which are basically just the warriors from two towns down, right?
Or, in other words, the people who commute to work.
Yeah, exactly. So okay, so in that sense, right? How does this translate? So I want to go through a couple of things, and the first is actually what we just talked about, right? It's like, okay, the idea that you make yourself stronger and you use your strength in service of others. This is something that I think applies pretty well, where that can still be true, but how you make yourself strong is maybe different, in the sense that it's not like, yeah, if you train, you go to the gym and you train and you get stronger, you're probably not going to have many opportunities to use that strength in service of others. Maybe you can help your friend move the couch.
Right, yeah.
But, and similarly, of course, you train martial arts, train self-defense, most likely you'll never need it, right? Because it's just not, like, that kind of hand-to-hand combat is pretty rare in these days, right?
Right.
So even though I think that's part of it, of course, right? If you have the skills, and I think you ought to, I want to be someone who has the skills. And if that ever happens, where I have to step up and defend someone physically, I will.
Right.
But I mean, it's never happened to me so far.
But also, like, from what I've heard from my friends who know martial arts, like, one thing that they talk about is, like, they have this level of calmness, right? Like, usually when people, like, the emotions get the best of them and they're like, oh, like, someone pushes someone or whatever, and even that causes accidents. Someone just pushes someone and, like, a car runs them over. All of a sudden you're screwed for life, right?
Yeah.
But, like, when you know how to fight, you're actively avoiding it, right? In your mind, it's the absolute last resort.
Yeah.
So you're the person actively de-escalating every situation, right?
Exactly, and I think that's an important point, because first of all, like you said, how dangerous it is. You know that even if it's just someone shoving, you could accidentally, someone falls down this flight of stairs or something, and now you're
Like,
charged
ruined that person's life and your own.
And your own, you're like sitting in in the jury stand because of manslaughter accusations, whatever, right? It's like, that's not cool. And also, and the other thing is also, even like, let's say, it's also like, even if you're really good at this, it doesn't take much for it to go wrong, right? So it's like, if someone pulls a knife, even if I'm really well-trained martial artist, I know that it takes one little slip up and I'm dead.
Yeah.
Right? And why would I risk that? and in fact, it's also part of I think that's also part of what you explore when you learn how to fight, is like, actually, ideally, you don't fight.
Yeah.
And how do I, like, distract and persuade and manipulate and misdirect this guy so that it doesn't end up being a knife fight, right?
Right, yeah.
But the other thing is also, and I think this is very, very important, is that when you're training in martial arts, you don't have anything to prove. And I think that makes a big difference, right? If you think of the typical, two drunk guys going at each other, they're both like, oh, yeah, let's find out, right? If
There's an ego component.
Yeah. And if you train martial arts regularly, you have nothing to find out. Right. Like, every time you train, there's someone in the gym who's better than you, and there's someone else in the gym who's not. And you know exactly where you stand, right? So you don't have to find out.
You've gotten your ass handed to you so many times. There's nothing to prove anymore.
Yeah, exactly. You're just like, no, I'm fine.
It's like, I know.
So, and I think that's a big factor too, like the ego deflation factor, or not having anything left to prove. Which actually, in a way, that is actually a reason to train martial arts. Not because you're going to put up your fist and fight someone and defend your girlfriend or something, right?
Right.
Like the heroic scenario you imagine. It's probably not going to happen. No, the thing is, that's not going to happen. Because before that escalates to that point, you've already dealt with the situation way better, because you're calm and because you're looking to avoid the fight instead of getting into a fight and stuff like that, right? So in a way, you are protecting people by making it so that there's no fight when there would have otherwise been one, right?
That's a good point, yeah. You just protected everyone versus just like your girlfriend or whatever, right?
Yeah. So even there, it is, even for that, it's useful. And like I said, even though I know that the practical application of this is very limited, I still want to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
But apart from the physical, for me, it's like, well, in what other ways can you be strong and uplift others, right? And that is where a lot of self-development comes in. And also a lot of, this is one of the reasons that I got interested in entrepreneurship and got interested in learning how to make more money, because at some point I had this realization where it's like, hey, actually, basically the more money I make, the more power I have to do good in the world, right? Like if I'm broke and I have a really good heart, there's only so much I can do, right? But if I do the hard work, and for me, this is also the warrior's way, right? It's like, okay, look, it's not easy to, to build a business that makes money. It's not easy to apply all this discipline to manage your finances well so that you become wealthy. It's not easy to do, but you do it, and you don't only do it in service of yourself, you do it in service of others, right? Do it so you can level up your own power, and then help others out. And then, and even more directly related to personal development, I think in many other ways as well, if you just think about, for example, your emotional development, right?
Right.
If you can be a person who's kind of at the whims of your emotions, right? So if you get angry, you shout at people, you get aggressive, you scare people, whatever, you get sad, you kind of unload on other people, right? And so in that case, you're not a positive influence in other people's life, right? It's like other people, you're a victim of your emotions, and other people also become a victim of your emotions, right?
Right.
And emotional development is the same kind of idea. The warrior's attitude is like, I'm going to become stronger, even though that's hard to do, right? That's the harder choice to make. But I'm going to do the work to become stronger so that I have a neutral or positive influence on other people, right? Because you can then be the person who stays calm when other people are freaking out, right?
Right.
And that is also a way in which you are using your strength in the service of others. So for me, that translates, essentially it's the same thing. Yeah.
It's like a modernized version of this, right? Like the thing that I was thinking about is like the modern day empires are essentially companies, right? Like companies can rule the world essentially now. Yeah. And similarly, like what does it mean to be a modernized warrior? Like, as you mentioned earlier, like we're not going to stand outside the house with a spear and like a shield, right? Like,
unfortunately,
yeah. I mean, I wish we could. That'd be great. Yeah. So like applying, is it the warrior mindset? Is that what you would call it? Or just the attitude? I
mean, to me, that's like the warrior's way, right? It's like, it's the path you choose is do the hard thing to become stronger in the service of others.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's like the lens or the perspective you have whenever you're approaching essentially anything in your life.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is like the personal gain you get from this? Or what is the innate desire to do this?
I think the desire is to be heroic, basically, right? It's like I said, the stories of heroes were very influential for me. And so I've always wanted to be a hero. And again, this is in a way, this is a realistic way in which you can be heroic without having to get into a fight again, right? Like, without having to put your physical body on the line. There's other ways in which to be heroic. And the things we've just talked about are all such things. So there's the desire to be a hero, which I think comes from like stories and that influence, right?
Right.
But there's also the other side to it, which is that, I mean, you watch a movie or something with a hero, and the hero is cool, right? It's like, so there's also, you're asking about personal gain, right? Well, I want to be the cool guy,
right?
Right? Who would if you watch the movie, who do you want to be? For me, it's always, it's always the warrior type I want to be, right? Because to me, that's the coolest dude. He's the capable one. He's the one. I don't know. You just want to be that. And of course, that is a side effect of all this, right? All this self-development you do, all the training you do. Just like all the training you do, even if you do all your training only in service of being a better combatant in order to be able to help other people, you're still going to look good, right? It's going to make you more attractive. Like your discipline, and we talked about this previously, right?
Yeah.
Your discipline, your capability your physical capability translates into attractiveness. So the personal gain is, well, you're going to be more attractive than if you hadn't done this. And I think the same is true for these other things as well. It's like you're leveling up yourself as a person. You're becoming more capable. You're becoming more attractive. Especially the thing, actually, the example of, emotionally, like getting your shit together emotionally, I think is something that's very, very attractive, actually. Like that's something that people notice about you, right? If you have like, you're kind of very calm and centered, you're not easily shaken.
Swayed,
right?
yeah.
That's something that makes you very attractive. And I don't only mean that in the sense of like sexually attractive, but also it's just like, it's something people look up to. It's something people like, admire, this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think like probably it's a good idea to point out whenever we're talking about attractive, it's not always in the sexual context, right?
Yeah.
It could be attractive in terms of like being a role model. Somebody some kid looks up to you like, oh man, I wish I could be like that. How did you do that, right?
It's like it raises your status, right?
Yeah.
Be the kind of the biological way of thinking about it, right? It raises your status. Yeah. So it's definitely not just self-sacrificing, right? One more thing on this note that I think is also important is that I think this warrior's attitude is something that we need more of. It's something that's important because it is the counter to this tendency that we're currently experiencing where the solution to everything is to like bubble wrap the world, right? Where everything is becoming safer and safer. And there's this great concern of, is everyone safe? Is everyone comfortable? And I think right now what we're experiencing is that being taken too far. And I think so it's in a literal sense, I remember when I was a kid on playgrounds, the kinds of things that were on playgrounds compared to what you see on playgrounds now. And you can really see that there's this trend of everything gets like rounded off, smoothed off. You can't climb as high anymore.
Right.
And it's all in service of, let's make it safer. I remember like one playground I played at when I was a kid had like a rusty old bulldozer just standing there as a thing as an object for kids to climb on and play with, right?
Right.
You would never see that anymore because it was full of like sharp edges and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So now I think if you proposed, hey, let's put this on the playground, the response would be some regulator or whatever would be like, no, we cannot absolutely look, there's a sharp edge here, people could get hurt here. So we're not having that. And instead we'll have like a rounded off plastic thing, right?
Yeah.
And of course it comes from a good place. It's like, hey, we don't want kids to get hurt. Okay, makes sense. The problem is that the more you round off the edges off everything, the safer you make everything, the lower people's capability becomes, right? And eventually, so it goes from you have kids like climbing on the tree and whatnot, and every once in a while someone, one of them falls out of the tree and breaks their leg, to like, even though everything's rounded off and smoothed off, now the kid trips and breaks his leg, right? Because it's just so fragile, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And in many ways that literally happens. Like for example, your immune system gets weakened if it's protected too much, right? So if you disinfect everything and you keep yourself from every possible harm and every possible pathogen, you just become more fragile.
Yeah, you're actually a weaker person. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it makes you a weaker person. So I think the counter to that, right? I'm not saying like, oh, let's make the world more dangerous, but the counter to this tendency of everything has to be safe, everything has to be trigger warning, safe space, smoothed off, bubble wrapped.
Right.
The counter to that is, hold on, another solution to prevent the harm you're trying to prevent is to make people stronger and more resilient. And that is something that, as if you're doing the warrior thing, you're choosing to role model that, right?
Right.
I am, you don't like, I am someone who, like, I am capable of navigating a dangerous physical landscape, right? Because I'm not that fragile. I'm also capable of navigating a difficult social situation, right? I'm not easily offended. Basically, right? Think about the difference between, being so fragile that you're like, oh, there's certain words that I can't hear, right? You can't, because what did I recently see? Like, in a Google Doc thing, someone typed something about property and wrote landlord. and there was a highlight on landlord, be like, oh, some people might be offended by this term, maybe use the term proprietor or property owner or whatever instead. It's like, oh, why is that? So wait, landlord, why? Because there's some connection to slavery or something, and some people are going to be like so triggered just seeing the word landlord, right? It's like, think about how fragile you are, if that's the case, versus I'm comfortable to say, do your best, try to hurt my feelings, right?
Right.
I'm going to be fine. Listen, you can do it. Fucking do it. Come up with the worst possible thing you can say to me, and I'm going to be perfectly fine. And this is not just because it's not that, I lived a life completely free of trauma or anything. It's because if I have trauma in my life, I'm like, let's fucking deal with it. Let's deal with this. I don't want to retreat and be like, oh my God, nobody can mention this thing that reminds me of my trauma, right?
Yeah, good point. And man, just on the bubble wrapping the world thing, right? I also think one, what you said, let's make everybody safe. But I also think that another major factor in all this is accountability.
Yeah.
Right. So for example, if someone's kid gets hurt in my playground, so instead of the parents being like, oh, my kid is clearly a fucking moron, let me teach this kid not to do this again. It's like, no, your playground is unsafe because little Timmy fucking got injured here. It's like, well, you know what? Fuck little Timmy. Teach him how to be a stronger person, so next time he doesn't do stupid shit.
Yeah, and I mean, it's for sure. If the immediate response is, oh, okay, you're gonna get sued, and it's gonna be, and it's an opportunity. It's basically an opportunity for me to make money by suing whoever.
Yeah, and that's also an incentive. Yeah, and by the way, I was, kind of using hyperbole here to emphasize the ridiculousness of the situation. I don't actually mean, someone named Timmy and fuck him.
Yeah. And I mean, but it is true that it's like, look, getting hurt is an inevitable part of childhood, right? And really, it's like we talked about, because of the fragility thing.
Yeah.
It's, in a way, and it's brutal to say this, but in a way, there's an optimum amount of trauma that you experience when you're growing up, right? If it's too much, it can break you, or it can lead to stuff that takes a long time to unwind. But if it's too little, if you don't experience any adversity, you don't, again, both physically and emotionally, right? If you don't experience any adversity, then the first time someone insults you, your whole world falls apart, right? Yeah. And so it's like, how you have to experience, you have to be knocked around a bit, right, in order to grow those capabilities. And I think it's one of those things, right? If you're playing on the playground and you fall down and you get hurt, that is one of those things that's a normal level of trauma. Even trauma is actually too big of a word to use here, right? It's a normal level of injury and adversity that you're supposed to experience. Yeah. And of course, if it's like, oh, why is there a guillotine on your playground? People are like, someone's head got chopped off.
That's a valid point.
It's like, maybe we should not have approved the guillotine.
Bulldozer, fine. Guillotine.
Yeah. So anyway, okay. So that's the first kind of aspect where I see this translate. Another thing that has been really valuable to me, both in my self-development and as an entrepreneur, is this idea of, it's like, if you think an aspect of the warrior archetype is to be unflinching in the face of danger, right?
Right.
And to be unflinching in the face of things that cause other people to run away and be afraid. And for me, the way this translates is that you make a habit of confronting the brutal facts. So confronting the brutal facts is actually a phrase that I took from the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, which is a business book, where he says that this is one of the qualities, right? They basically did this analysis to find out the qualities of the best companies and CEOs. And that's one of the common things they found, right? The really capable CEOs have this trait of confronting the brutal facts unflinchingly. So, whereas, a weak CEO will want yes men who make things sound better than they are, right?
Right.
So it's like, whatever, let's say, some product line is not selling well this quarter. The weak CEO will want people to sugarcoat it and be like, oh, in this sector over here, things are going really well. And here things are going really well. And, on this product line, well, it's a slow start, but things are looking good, right? Whereas a strong CEO will want someone to come in and say, listen, this product line, nobody's buying it. We're getting bad reviews. People hate this, right? It's like, I want that level of truth, right?
Yeah.
And that is the idea of confronting the brutal facts. And for me, that has been a really, really important trait. Again, that's like the equivalent. You're not staring down a dragon or something.
Right.
But that's like the equivalent, right? Are you running away from truth? Do you want people to be in denial? Do you want to be in denial? Or are you like, no, hit me with whatever,
right.
However bad it is, I want to know the full story, right?
Okay. In service of that, right, or in pursuit of that, can you still feel like, oh, I don't really want to find out, but just give it to me, man. Just give it to me. Like,
yeah. I mean, of course, yeah, of course.
Okay.
It's not that. It's something you have to continually practice, right?
Right. I guess it gets easier over time.
I think it's the same kind of thing as when you're exercising, right? When you're lifting weights, it's not that your muscles don't burn because you've been training a lot,
Yeah.
right? It's still hard, but you get used to that kind of hard thing.
Yeah. And man, when you were talking about, running around in the playground and falling is a natural part of the adversity you're supposed to experience, right? Like my mind went to business as well, and immediately to like perfectionism and whatnot. Like, why are you looking for the perfect plan so you don't make a mistake, so you don't fall down, so you don't feel the hurt, right? It's like the same thing. It's kind of like just accept that some shit you're gonna do, you're gonna look back and be like, why the hell did I do that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's also like for me the only path to success for me really was through lots and lots and lots of failure, lots of trial and error. Right. There's so many things that I have tried and failed at, and I think it's something that I really, really want to emphasize because I think it's one of the greatest delusions. Is like, you're a successful entrepreneur. The story must be somehow that, you did things and everything worked out, right? It's like, listen, if you could understand how many things I have done and failed at, it would turn your stomach, right? I honestly fully believe that I have failed at more things than most people will ever attempt in their life, right?
Wow.
I've experienced so much failure, but again, it's like, I'm not trying to avoid that. I'm throwing myself at this problem of whatever it is that I'm doing in my business. And I'm like, okay, I want to learn the lesson, right? Tell me if this doesn't work. Tell me why the thing I do sucks. Like, I want to know so I can get better later.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, I hope this is correct. It's like batting 300 in baseball, right? What does that mean? It means 70% of the time you suck.
Right.
But like, that makes you a Hall of Famer.
Right. Yeah. So again, and I think, the perfectionism is like the extreme other side of that, right? Where you're basically so afraid that you're constantly holding back. And that's a really crippling thing, especially for entrepreneurs and creators.
And just the thing you just mentioned, one last point on is like, that's some warrior shit, right? Like, you go and get beaten every day.
And you show up again the next day.
Yeah. It just reminded me of, I think the movie was like 36 Chambers of Shaolin. Like, Jackie Chan's just struggling the whole time. He's like, this sucks. Then he finally gets it, right? He's happy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You got to be able to take the punishment for sure. But, and another part of this that I think is highly applicable to the world we live in right now is that you don't seek the comfort of delusion, right? Which also means, outside of a business context, it's like you train yourself to be skeptical of the comfort of simple stories, right? Because no matter where you are at in life, there's always people who are going to tell you a simple story that is the story you want to hear. Okay. And this kind of the confronting the brutal facts thing is to not just accept the comfort of that simple story. And what I mean by that is, so part of it is that you don't just go with the herd mentality.
Right. And
that the phrase I have in my head for this is like, it's always like, look, I'm not here to join your club, right?
Right.
It's like if I'm, and the problem is there's clubs everywhere that want you to join, right? So it's like, okay, if I'm trying to learn about healthy nutrition, I'm not here to join your club. I'm not here to join the veganism club or the keto club or the carnivore or the whatever the fuck. I don't care, right? Yeah. I'm not here to join your little party. I want to understand. And again, I want tell me the brutal facts about this. Don't tell me some fucking feel-good story like, oh, your ancestors, blah, 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 mammoth meat. Here's some bullshit, right? No, I don't care. And And the thing is, I think this is a really important attitude. It's a difficult attitude to have, but it's a very important attitude, because look at how in the nutrition space, for me, that's one of the, one of the clearest ones, where people just sort themselves into these tribes.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it just becomes about confirming your tribal belonging, right?
Yeah.
And even though they dress up what they say as, here's the truth about nutrition, no, you're just signaling, I belong to this club, right?
Yeah.
It's like, don't waste my fucking time with this. Like, there's something, to me, again, like, this is because you have simply found like your little comfort zone, right? It's like, oh, here, the people accept me for what I believe now. And we all confirm each other. Oh yeah, you're the best because you're doing the thing that we all do, right? And you're so right. You're so much smarter than these other people. Look how dumb these other people are. It's like, that's pathetic. I'm sorry, but that's pathetic, right? Because you're just seeking the comfort of belonging. And it's even like, you're belonging to some online tribe. These people don't even actually know you, right?
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's the easy path. That's the tempting path, right? And the warrior thing to do is be like, hold on, this is getting suspiciously comfortable. Let me get back on the path of actually learning something, even though that means I get excluded from all the clubs.
Like, have I deviated from my goal of learning what's the best way, what's the best like nutritional plan or whatever for my specific needs, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and just on that, like, while that's true, you fall for the comfort of the thing, like the collectivism or whatever. But what I was going to say was, like, the base level need for belonging is being exploited here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's also what's happening. Like, yes, be mindful of it, but also realize that you're being exploited here to, I don't know why. I actually don't know why.
It is a basic human drive, right? And the nutrition thing is just one example where, to me, it's very clear to see. Another one where it's very clear to see is political leanings, right? Where it's just people being part of a club, right?
Yeah.
And it's always presented as, oh, we're talking about serious issues, and here's the truth, and here's why the other side is wrong. But no, all you're doing is you're signaling tribal belonging, and you're being intellectually lazy, basically. Right? If every opinion you have aligns with a political party, you're being intellectually lazy. There's just no way. Right. There's no way.
I have no opinions.
Yeah.
Whatever you say, I believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
It's like, dude, come on. But yeah, and it is like we have the basic need of belonging, right? We're tribal.
Right.
But again, that's why the warrior is the archetype here that matters, because it takes strength to not just fall into that, right?
Yeah.
And it takes strength to say, I'm going to stand up for something, even though it makes other people be like, oh, this guy's not one of us anymore, let's boo him or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Which happens a lot online. And I also think, I'm absolutely not against forming tribes, but I want to form tribes in real life. Right? I want to have a group of people in real life where, and you can have, you can be bound together by something you do, like practicing martial arts together or whatever, right? You do something together, which is where you don't have to have some kind of a weird shared ideology, and now I have to have the same fucking opinion about stuff as you guys, otherwise I'm not part of the club anymore. It's like, again, that for me triggers the I'm not here to join your club thought, right? Because I don't want that kind of intellectual laziness, and I also don't want to have that kind of, like you were saying, there's like an element of manipulation there, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm not interested in.
Yeah. Also, another thing I was going to mention was, I think the reason the simple stories are easy to accept, like, I think people in general, in mass, are just struggling and tired, right? And by the time it comes to, like, okay, vegans, yeah, oh, they're murdering cows, yeah, that sounds bad. Like,
yeah,
what? That calf looks cute. Like, no, I don't want veal. Like, yeah, boo, right? Like,
yeah,
and that person is just spent 9 hours at work, 3 hours in the commute, came home, probably got, screamed at by his wife or whatever.
Yeah.
And now he's like, I gotta give a shit about vegans, like, or whatever, right? Like, so that exists as well. I think it's called decision-making fatigue, where you're just like mentally burnt out and you can't actually use your mental faculties, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, right? That's also where and that is basically the problem. It always takes more work to arrive at a at a more complex, more real, you know, or more intellectually honest story than to just follow the simple story.
Yeah, and like even the energy that I was describing, right? Like that did not at all sound like warrior energy. That sounded like someone who's defeated, who's like just sitting there. Yeah, sure, whatever. Give me whatever scraps you have.
yeah.
And the warrior stands up, like no,
Yeah.
no, I refuse this, right?
Yeah. Also, what's connected to what we've talked about is I think that you basically want to seek out and, if possible, eliminate your weaknesses, which I think is very much connected to the things we already talked about. Because instead of trying to be in denial of your weaknesses, like as a warrior, you're very interested in knowing about your weaknesses, because if you don't, you might find out by getting killed on a battlefield, right? And that's a bad way to find out. Much better way to find out is like someone hits you with a wooden sword and is like, dude, your guard is weak here, right?
Right.
That's a much better way to learn about this problem. So it's the same kind of thing, because it's less comfortable. It's better to just tell yourself, oh yeah, me and the people in my club, we're right, and everyone else is wrong, and I have no weaknesses, right? It's much easier than to say, hold on, okay, now I have to do the work of like, you know, what are my biases here? Could I be wrong about this? Am I making some systematic mistake here in my thinking or my decision making or something? And then I have to do work to like fix that. Again, it's like, it's a big ask, right? It's definitely not the comfortable choice.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it depends, like, what is the outcome you want, right?
Yeah.
If you resign to the comfort of, like, you know, the tribal experience and the belonging, then you've already lost sight of why you were seeking this in the first place.
Right. I mean, and it's not the warrior's way, right? You can do that, but it's not the warrior's way. And another factor in terms of when it comes to weaknesses, right? And this is, I wish more people were aware of this. I wish more people did this. This is one of those things I genuinely feel like if more people did this, the world would be a better place. And it has to do with there's a type of weakness which is basically posturing as strength, right? So, and I think that is something to be aware of in yourself and in others. And to me, that is the thing that is the most loathsome, is when you pretend to be strong when you're actually weak, right? So it's essentially the dog that barks as long as it's on the leash, right?
Right.
And as soon as you take off the leash, it just like sits there all peaceful, right?
Go shit.
Yeah. So, and you see that a lot, and unfortunately you see that a lot in media, where people are posturing, right? So you see like the alpha male types, right? Or basically the alpha male, sigma male, God knows what they've moved on to now, right?
Omega, whatever.
Yeah. So the various Greek letter male types will often be like that, where they're just constantly posturing, right? They're constantly like, they're basically being loud and brash and obnoxious. They're puffing out their chests and stuff. And it's like, this is fake. This is fake strength, right? And it is tragic how many people fall for that, right? It's tragic how many people don't recognize this. It's basically a display of weakness. It's a display of, like, you're so insecure, right? You're so insecure that you constantly have to talk about how tough you are, basically.
Right. Good point.
And this is something that it's tragic to me how many people fall for this. And like I said, I think that the world would be a better place if we could all recognize that this poor person is projecting their weakness out at the world, right? And maybe they need help, but they're certainly not someone to follow, right? This is not leadership quality. And I think, again, that is, you can only get there, I guess, if you have these qualities of like seeking out your weaknesses, confronting the brutal facts, and so on. You have to be willing to see that in yourself in order to not just be taken in by the strong man, right? The quote unquote strong man,
right?
Who usually offers to be your leader in exchange for something, right?
Yeah.
Like you can, you have your Andrew Tates or whatever, who will do all this posturing and take your money, right?
Yeah, good point. Buy my expensive program. Yeah. That's fair. But two things actually. The first one is the thing you mentioned. If someone is projecting their weakness, right, and posing as strength, like that person needs to get their emotional shit together.
Yeah.
And if like a large or a massive crowd of people is resonating with that, and actively, you know, saying, "Oh yeah, this guy's amazing. He's saying the truth." Like, imagine how widespread that problem actually is.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Yeah. All of them need to get their shit together. Yeah.
Yeah. Like one thing I think about quite a bit is like, I think the times of like the benevolent leaders that would lift people up, I think they're long gone. Like, or at least I'm not familiar with too many current examples of this.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that the time is gone. I think it's always been rare, you know. I think it's always been rare. At least ones that have, and I'm not a historian or anything, right? But it's like, the only example I know of at the top of my head would be Marcus Aurelius. That's a long time ago.
Pretty freaking long time ago, yeah.
But I'm sure it has happened, and I'm sure it does happen still, right? It's probably just, it does seem to be rare.
Right.
It certainly doesn't happen a lot, right?
Yeah. Like, mostly what I see is like, it's like almost everyone has figured out, you know, marketing. Like, meet people where they're at, keep pinching their, or, you know, pushing their buttons, and boom. Yeah. Tell them every now and then, click the link and they'll buy. Like,
yeah, and sadly that's basically how politics works as well, except that the call to action is vote instead of buy.
It's true.
But okay, so what's the counter to this, or what's the solution to this, right? If we have all this fake posturing. So for me, the goal that I strive for, and that I would love to encourage more men especially to pursue, is to become a wholesome badass. Because especially, so speaking of men, right? So in the manosphere and among the alpha male types and whatnot, there's a lot of this posturing, and there's a lot of talk about, you know, becoming masculine and becoming strong and stuff. And it's not that I disagree with them. In fact, I think that you absolutely ought to. And again, I'm just advocating for the warrior archetype here, right? So I'm not saying this is the universal truth and everybody has to do it. I'm saying this is what I stand for. This is what I'm advocating is, yes, you should follow the warrior's path and you should become lethal. So if anything, I'm not saying, oh, they're wrong about this. I'm saying they don't take it far enough. I think you should do more than just go to the gym and lift weights and look big and muscular. I think you should learn how to fight. I think you should learn how to survive. I think you should learn how to use weapons. I think you should become lethal. I think you should learn how to use your mind. I think you should learn how to persuade, right? Become lethal. Don't just look strong. Again, it's a little pathetic. If you just look strong, it's like, come on. So,
hey man, less people fuck with you. I'll be honest, it's true.
Well, sure, yeah, that's fine. But listen, take it further.
Yeah. No, I've been thinking about that a lot, because especially about the fighting thing. I'm like, I would love to be that capable, and not only that, like, I want to find out, am I that capable? Right? Like, we were talking about this earlier. Like, every now and then, you figure out, oh, I didn't know I could do that. That is a fantastic feeling to have, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm all for it, right? I'm all for developing strength, including developing these, essentially leveling up your power, right? So your physical power, your capability, your ability to survive, but also your ability to persuade, your ability to change the world, essentially, right? Level up, absolutely. But be wholesome while you do that. And I think that is where that's where true strength lies, right? Because don't be harmless, okay? Don't be harmless. That is, again, the warrior's perspective is, that's pathetic. I'm sorry. If you're nice because you're harmless, it's like you don't have any other choice, basically, that's weak.
Okay, that's what you mean. Yeah. I was going to ask, like, what do you mean here? Okay.
Yeah. It's basically, you know, if you're nice to people, you're always polite, you're a people pleaser, right? You don't ruffle anyone's feathers, you don't rock the boat. Why? Because you're weak. Because you're weak, because you're afraid. Because you're like, well, I can't win an argument, I can't win a fight. I can't, right? I'm too scared. That is not a good way to be nice.
Okay.
So that's the thing, like, be kind, but don't be harmless. So I can win a fight, I can win an argument, you know, I can do all kinds of stuff, but that doesn't mean I have to do it all the time. That doesn't mean I have to start a fight.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's basically about having the option. it's about having the option where it's like, look, I can be in a situation where, I don't know, I'm having an argument with someone, and I can choose to be like, I'm going to win this argument, right? I'm going to use my communication skills, my persuasion, maybe even a bit of manipulation to win this argument. Or I can be like, you know what, let's not do that, and I can de-escalate.
Right.
But I have a choice, and that's important, right? And it's the same with a fight, right? It's like, whenever possible, I'm going to avoid getting into a physical fight. And I'm going to do what I can to de-escalate that. But I have a choice. I can fuck you up if I want to. And that's what I mean by I'm not harmless, but I'm kind. Okay?
Right.
So this is the idea of being a wholesome badass. Like, you want to be strong and gentle. You want to be capable and kind, right? And this also brings together these two sides of the warrior, right? The warrior makes himself strong and formidable and dangerous, and he uses it in service of others.
Yeah. He chooses to.
Yeah.
You just reminded me of one of my favorite quotes. It's like, in order to be a gentleman, you have to be a man first.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you have to be the beast first.
Yeah.
And then you put the leash on it.
And that's also what makes it cool, right?
Yeah.
It is like, it is exactly that contrast is what makes it cool. If gentle is your only option, it's a lot less cool.
Doesn't sound very attractive in any sense of the word.
Yeah. And it's also, you know, again, the warrior's way is basically always about choosing the right thing, even though it's the harder thing, right? It is much easier to just be a loud, obnoxious asshole and project fake strength like that than it is to be gentle and strong.
Yeah, because you're counting on nobody calling you out.
Yeah.
Basically. As soon as like someone walks up to you calmly, it's like, bro. You're like, oh shit, now what?
Yeah. But it's like it takes less work, right? It's easier to do, right? It's easier to project fake strength than to develop real strength, right? And it's also easier to do because if you just lean on the like strength, masculinity, aggression side, that's only half the work, right? What I'm saying is you have to do that work, plus you have to get your emotional shit together. You have to, you know, you have to be able to sit with the difficult emotions.
Right.
You have to have the other side of the coin as well. So I'm basically saying you have to do twice as much work.
Yeah. Wow. And one of the things that, just to unpack the previous point you were making about, you know, be lethal, right? Like, practically, you know, you skill up or level up your skills in fighting and I guess persuasion and all the things you had mentioned. But what about in like people interaction, right? So one thing that went through my mind, if somebody crosses your boundary, you actually have the balls to say it, right? Versus just like, you know,
exactly.
I go write in my diary today, like, dear diary, fucking so-and-so pissed me off.
Yeah, exactly. You stand up for yourself. And I think that's one of the things. Having strong boundaries is really important.
Right.
It's really important for your development as a person. It's really important for your emotional and mental well-being. It's also really important for how your life evolves, right? Because if you can't stand up for yourself, you will probably find that your life path is often like determined by other people, right? You find yourself like pushed and shoved into doing things that you didn't really want to do. And that can build up like a lot of resentment and stuff like that, right? Yeah. Whereas if you have the strength to set clear boundaries and stand up for them, that is, it's basically, it's going to have a huge positive effect on lots of aspects of your life, but you have to develop the strength to do it.
Yeah, that's true. I remember you gave me that advice a few months ago. And it didn't click to me until you said it. He's like, dude, you got to stand up for yourself, man. Fuck. And as soon as we got off the phone, I'm like, God damn, pathetic. Fuck. But I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
I needed to hear that.
So that's the idea of the becoming a wholesome badass. Now, another thing that there's two more things that I wrote down here that I think are like part of, again, the modern application of the warrior archetype. One of them is shadow work, which we've talked about before. To me, I think one of the reasons I find it so appealing is because it's almost like the internal battle, right?
Right.
So for those unfamiliar, right, shadow work is essentially an approach to therapy where you bring out the demons and you deal with them. So you have something that you find, I don't know, emotionally triggering. You have something that you find really upsetting. And instead of like trying to distract yourself from it or deny it, you're like, no, let's bring that out and sit with it, right? So for example, if there is something that, that's, there's something where you tend to get really upset or get really angry or withdraw or whatever, right? So it's kind of an emotional reaction that you essentially try to trigger that, right? You're like, okay, let's go there. Let's think about the things that bring this strong emotional reaction forward and sit with it and experience the emotions in the body and like basically go through it instead of trying to run away from it. And to me, this is like the internal application of the warrior's attitude, where you're not running away from the fear. You're not running away. You're not flinching. You're saying, okay, bring it on. Bring this unpleasant shit, right?
Right.
And it's super powerful. Like it's such a powerful thing to do, because I think we often find that, we're constantly running away from things. And usually it then becomes like this chronic problem, right, that you always have. And I think often addictions are like that. So, and I'm talking about mild addictions as well. So you might be addicted to your phone, right? We're just like constantly, in every quiet moment, you're pulling out your phone, doing something to distract yourself. It's like, okay, why is that? If you stop doing that, what happens? And maybe you'll find that, oh shit, some thoughts come up that you don't want to be thinking, right? Yeah. And shadow work is like saying, okay, let's experience that fully. I want the full dose of this stuff that I'm usually trying to avoid.
Like give me all of it.
Yeah.
Full intensity. Okay.
And sometimes, right? And so when we have this in the ikario community, you can go through, we have some workshops where we go into this in more detail, and you can do specific exercises. But the idea or the point is that often that is the solution. Like simply sitting with this experience that you're trying to avoid for long enough, that's sometimes the solution. The thing resolves itself just by you allowing yourself to experience it, right? And sometimes that can take, maybe it can be in a single sitting, and sometimes it could take longer than that. But sometimes sometimes that's all you need. It's like the solution was to stop running away from the thing you keep running away from.
Okay. How does that resolve it, though?
Well, so there's many theories about this. Like one of them that makes sense to me is the kind of the somatic theory, which is related to, which is basically like your system, right? Your nervous system, your body has ways to deal with difficult traumatic events, but that has to play out. And so what you can see, or at least I've been told, I haven't seen this in person, but I've been told that what you see is like, let's say you see a deer and it gets pounced on by a cat and it gets away, right? It gets away from the predator or from the wolves or whatever it was attacked by. Once it's, at a safe distance, it's ran away, it will stop, and you'll see this massive shudder go through its body, which is like all the adrenaline and all the stuff dumping, right? Physically going out, and it's probably not a pleasant experience for the deer in that moment,
right? But
it's just like processing that whole thing all at once, and then it's fine and it keeps going, right?
Wow.
And what we tend to do is something bad happens and we like hold it in, right? We tense up, we hold the experience in, and then we're like, oh no, don't think about the thing, and we're constantly running away from it. And so I think one reason why, like especially, milder trauma, right? Not super traumatic stuff, but especially milder trauma, I think all it needs to go through that process. And that might be you sitting there like crying for half an hour. Like that's what it takes for your system to like shake out this negative experience. Like physically, right? Your nervous system is like shedding this experience, and then it's done. And as long as you're putting that off, it like calcifies in your body and just keeps getting worse.
So this is what was the guy say? David Hawkins, like in Letting Go, he talks about allowing the emotion to run its course.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's something that I've definitely experienced with shadow work. It's not the only thing, but that's something I've experienced several times, where because of my practice of shadow work, I've noticed like difficult emotions come up and I've let them like pass through me, which is unpleasant, right? It's not like I'm having a good time while this is happening, but it's unpleasant, and then it's over, right?
Right.
And that is again, like it's the unpleasantness and being willing to go through that experience. To me, it's like the warrior's attitude that allows you to do that, right? It's where you say, yeah, sure, this sucks, bring it on.
Yeah. Oh, I remember the other question I had for you. So when you just said like being willing to go through this, right? I think I asked in a different way already, but similarly, like, okay, you know you should do this, so you sit down to do it, but you're not fully willing, but you're like, I'm gonna do it anyway. It's kind of like in the martial arts movies when they show the trainees, right? They're like, fuck, this is so hard, man.
Yeah.
Like, I guess, yeah, is there anything wrong with that?
No, that's part of it, right? That is part of it. It's like, you're not always going to feel like it, right? That's part of discipline. You're not always going to feel like it. And it's not that you're not scared, right? It's basically only the psychos are never scared. So it's not that you always feel like doing the hard thing. It's not that you're never scared. It's not that. It is like the willingness to have the negative experience, right? It's the willingness to say, well, even though this sucks, I'm going to do it anyway. And even though I'm afraid, I'm going to go into this fight anyway. Right? And I think that's important, right? Because I don't think it's helpful to feel like you have to, I don't know, you have to be like this robot, right?
Right.
Who always just perfectly executes and whatnot. That's not what it's like to be a human being.
Right. So the master warrior, he still feels it, but he just like does it anyway, right? It's just externally not visible, I guess.
Yeah.
Because for him, he knows that if he shows his fear, that now is a sign of weakness.
Well, and also he's already made his decision, right? I think with that's also like, if we're talking about actual warriors and actual combat or battle, it's like you've already decided that you're willing to do this long ago. So you're not here going, oh my God, should I? What if I die? No, this is a done deal. You've already decided that you're willing to die, right? Which is, I think, also like that's often what then looks like total fearlessness. It's not necessarily fearlessness. It's just like the decision is already made. I'm not here trying to make a decision. All right. And that actually is a good segue to the last thing I wrote down, which is to have principles to live by. To have a set of principles that you live by, which I think there is not enough of. Yeah. I feel like that's one of those things where, that's usually an element of religion, is that you have some rules to live by, right? Where the idea is, well, depends on the religion, but like the idea is you follow these rules because it's the right thing to do. It gets a bit muddied when it's like, oh, and if you don't, you get punished forever. So then it's like, am I really doing it because it's the right thing? Never mind. And I think that is kind of missing, right? What's missing is, and I think what a lot of people are also seeking is this kind of, well, what are the rules for life, right? I think it's interesting that Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, is that's what it's called, and it's such a hit. Yeah. I think it shows that people are like grasping for rules for life. And I think it's something we also talked about a lot before, right? The idea that you can't just live on autopilot. In the world that we live in now, if you just drift along, if you just go with the flow, it generally leads to misery, right? It leads to bad outcomes. So you have to have like a set of rules by which you decide how to do things. And you have to have these principles that allow you to say, even though this is the harder choice right now, I live by these principles, so this is what I'm doing. And again, to me, that is like connected to the warrior's way, right? Because it's like you have your code essentially, and yeah, you do the thing because it's the right thing, even if it's the hard thing.
Yeah, it's like it's core values essentially, right? Yeah. Are there some that you can share just as an example? If someone's like, oh, yeah, how do I create my own code, my own principles?
I mean, that's an interesting question, right? I think that is, I mean, the short answer for me to that is through writing. You have to think about it and think about, well, what is important to me? Where do I draw the line? Stuff like that, right? But yeah, like for me, we talked about that in a previous episode. Like an example of that in my own life is the idea that I want to live in such a way that my word has weight. And we've talked about that as like being living with integrity, right?
Right.
And so that's one of the principles I live by, where it's like, if I said I'm going to do something, then I'm going to go really, really far to make sure I do it, even if it's very, very difficult, even if it would be much easier not to do it, and even if no one is telling me, hey, by the way, you should do it, right?
Right.
So even if there's like no downside to quitting,
Yeah.
and a lot of downside to doing it anyway, I choose to do that, right?
Yeah. Well, the downside to quitting is like, I didn't do what I said.
Yeah. You have to then live with
That's
that.
worse, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that would be an example. And again, like the idea of using every opportunity. Yeah, like using the opportunity to use your own strength in the service of others, right? Is also like just a rule I live by, where it's like, if there's ever a choice between here's a selfish thing to do that's just for me, and here's something that's maybe not as good for me, but it's good for someone else, it's in service of someone else, or it's in service of something I believe is right, then I'm going to make that choice, even though it's the harder choice.
As long as you believe it's right, not just self-sacrificing for the sake
of
it.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't just want to be going around self-sacrificing every chance you get, because that is actually kind of a behavior that some people have, right? We're just constantly trying to crucify themselves.
Yeah. It's like, what is it called? Martyr syndrome or something?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that would be an example of like dealing with your emotional shit and confronting the brutal facts, where it's like, listen, you're not actually doing this selflessly. You're actually just doing this compulsively, right?
Yeah. You're just rationalizing.
Yeah.
That it's for the greater good or whatever.
So those are my thoughts on how the Warrior's Way applies to actual real life. And it's something that, like I said, because of this injury, it became more clear to me lately how important this is for me. And it is something that, I think it's important, and I wanted to talk about it, but I'm also slightly reluctant to talk about it because I feel like I'm not living it as much as I want to right now. I'm especially not happy with my current like physical level of capability, or I'm really not comfortable with that, really. With this state of I'm still in recovery and whatnot. But also even like the martial arts aspect is something I've neglected in recent years. And it is something that I really I don't want to be just talking about it. I want to live this, and I want to live it more than I have in recent years. So it's also, in a way, I'm also putting this out there. I'm putting this out there as a hopefully useful set of ideas. But it's also, it's kind of a reminder to myself as well to really live these values. Because I also believe that, what you do, what you role model is always more important than what you talk about. Right? I definitely don't want to be the guy who talks on a podcast about the Warrior's Way and then doesn't live it, right? But yeah, I thought it was like I said, I don't live this as much as I want to right now, but I thought it was a good moment to talk about it because my experience with recovering from this injury has just clarified how important this is for me. I think, more so than before, because it's something that I took with me from such an early stage in life that I often don't realize. Like, it's so normal to me that I don't realize what I'm doing, or that I don't realize how big of a role it plays in my life, right? So hopefully that's something I can, hopefully it resonates with people. And if it does, it's something that we can also dive deeper into, because for me, it has been a huge factor in my own development. And I think I've benefited massively from this. I have no idea what my life would look like if I hadn't had this influence, right? I can't imagine that it would be very good. I feel like it's really like one of the sources of a lot of the good things and good outcomes I've had in life.
Yeah. Just one more thing that stands out to me now is like, it adds meaning to the struggle as well, because otherwise you're just suffering.
That's true. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Ideally your suffering can lead to more strength, right? Because it's like the idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is, well, hopefully, right?
Yeah, hopefully true, yeah.
I hope so, man. I hope I'm not just suffering. All right. Okay, with that, do you happen to know, do we have a URL for people to sign up for the shadow workshops?
It's just ikario.com/join. You join the community, and you can search shadow workshop, but I'll handle it.
Yeah. So I would say that is the, if you want to learn more about that, the shadow workshops would be the place to go. So that would be ikario.com/join, where you can join for free. And if you enjoyed this conversation, then you can send it to a friend who you think will benefit from it. And also, if you have any questions about this, if there's anything else on this topic that you want to learn more about, please feel free to leave a comment. And I think that's it. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.